You think you know what you are doing. That is the problem. Right now, somewhere in the world, a man is explaining climate science to an actual climatologist. A teenager is correcting a surgeon about how the human body works. A person who read 3 articles last Tuesday is demolishing decades of peer-reviewed research in a Facebook comment. And the terrifying part, the part that should keep you up at night, is that every single one of them feels completely, totally, 100% certain they are right. This is not stupidity in the traditional sense. This is something far more dangerous. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect. And before you lean back in your chair and think, yeah, I know people like that, stop. Because the entire point of what we are about to explore is that the people who need to hear this most are always the last ones to recognize themselves in it. The question is not whether you have ever fallen into this trap. The question is whether you are in it right now. Let us go back to 1999. David Dunning and Justin Kruger, 2 psychologists at Cornell University, ran a series of experiments that would eventually make psychological history. They tested people on logic, grammar, and humor. Then they asked those same people to estimate how well they had performed compared to everyone else. What they found was almost too strange to believe. The people who scored in the bottom quarter, the ones who had genuinely performed the worst, consistently believed they had performed above average. Not slightly above average, significantly above average. They were not lying. They were not being modest or falsely confident for the cameras. They genuinely did not know what they did not know. And that gap, the distance between their actual ability and their perceived ability, that gap is where the trap lives. Dunning described it perfectly. He said that the skills required to be good at something are often the same skills required to recognize that you are bad at it. Read that again slowly. The competence to know you are incompetent requires the same competence you do not yet have. You are not just bad at the thing. You are bad at knowing you are bad at the thing. The trap does not just hold you down. It blindfolds you while doing it. Here is where modern life makes this 1,000 times worse. The internet did not create the Dunning-Kruger effect. Human beings have been overestimating themselves since the beginning of recorded history. But the internet gave it a megaphone, a platform, and an algorithm that rewards it. Think about what happens when you spend 3 hours watching YouTube videos about a topic. You feel like you understand it. And in a shallow sense, maybe you do. You have the vocabulary now. You have the general shape of the argument. You can name drop the right concepts at a dinner party and watch people nod. But what you have actually done is arrive at the most dangerous point on the entire learning curve, the peak of what researchers now call Mount Stupid. Mount Stupid is not a joke. It is a real cognitive landmark in human development. When you first encounter a new subject, your confidence is low because you know nothing. But within a short time, sometimes just hours, you absorb enough surface-level information that your confidence rockets upward, and this is the peak. This is the summit of Mount Stupid, where the view is great, the air feels thin and exhilarating, and you genuinely believe you have figured it out. You have not. You are standing on a cliff made of half-formed ideas and borrowed vocabulary. And the people who actually know the subject, the experts, the ones who have spent years grinding through complexity, they are not at the top of that mountain. They are in the valley below it, buried in nuance, which is exactly why they seem less confident than you. This is the great inversion of intelligence. Expertise breeds doubt. Ignorance breeds certainty. And in a world that rewards confidence over accuracy, in a world of hot takes and viral arguments, the Dunning-Kruger trap is not a bug in the system. It is a feature. Think about the political landscape right now. A person watches a 2-minute video explaining why a certain economic policy is a disaster. They feel a surge of clarity. They understand it now. They go into the comments section, or the family dinner, or the workplace break room, and they speak with the conviction of someone who has spent years studying macroeconomics, because in their mind, they have covered the essential ground. The actual economists, the ones who spent 15 years studying second-order effects and historical precedent, are too busy drowning in caveats to be this confident. So who wins the argument? The person with the 2-minute download, every time. Not because they are right. Because they sound like they are. And this is how bad information spreads. Not because evil people are strategically deceiving everyone, though that happens too. It spreads because genuinely good people, people who think they are doing the right thing, have confused the feeling of understanding with the reality of it. They mistake fluency for mastery. They mistake the map for the territory. Now here is the part that gets uncomfortable. This does not just happen with politics or science. It happens in the most personal corners of your life. It happens in your relationships, where you have convinced yourself you know exactly why someone behaved the way they did, based on a pattern you half read about in a psychology thread. It happens in your career, where you have been in a role for 6 months and already have 17 ideas about how the entire company should be restructured. It happens in your health, your finances, your philosophy of life. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not a trait reserved for the obviously uninformed. It is a gravitational pull that affects every human mind, at every level of education, in every domain where knowledge has edges you have not yet reached. Here is a line that should rattle something in you. The smarter you are in one area, the more likely you are to fall into this trap in another. Intelligence is not a general shield against overconfidence. In many ways, it is the opposite. Because smart people are better at constructing convincing narratives. They are better at connecting dots in ways that feel coherent but might be completely wrong. They can build elaborate intellectual architecture on a foundation of thin evidence and never notice the cracks because the building looks so impressive from the inside. Dunning himself said that the very sophistication that makes intelligent people good thinkers also makes them more capable of self-deception at scale. This is why some of the most dangerously wrong ideas in history were championed by highly educated people. Because education gives you tools without automatically giving you wisdom. It gives you a framework without guaranteeing the framework is pointed at reality. The Dunning-Kruger trap does not care how many degrees hang on your wall. It only cares whether the growth of your knowledge has kept pace with the growth of your confidence. So what does someone who is genuinely stuck at the peak of Mount Stupid look like? They dominate conversations without asking questions. They have an answer ready before you finish your sentence. They interpret disagreement as evidence that the other person simply has not understood what they are saying yet. And so they explain it again, louder or slower, or with more condescension. They are not open to being wrong because in their internal model of reality, being wrong is not a live possibility. They confuse the absence of counter-evidence with the presence of proof. They have never truly sat with the discomfort of not knowing something, because their brain fills that discomfort automatically with manufactured certainty. And here is the cruelest twist. They are often charming. They are often magnetic, because certainty is magnetic. Because confidence, even when it is completely unearned, tends to attract people who are looking for someone who seems to have the answers. The Dunning-Kruger effect does not just trap its host, it radiates outward and traps the people around them too. But now, and this is the pivot, let us talk about what the other side of this looks like. Let us talk about what happens when you actually push through. The learning curve has a shape that most people never bother to understand. At the very beginning, you know nothing, and you know that you know nothing. Confidence is low, but that is correct, it should be low. Then you learn a little, and your confidence shoots upward. That is the peak of Mount Stupid. But if you keep going, if you do not stop at the peak, if you do not plant a flag and declare victory, something happens. You start to encounter the real complexity. You realize that every answer you found just revealed 3 more questions underneath it. Your confidence drops. Not because you are getting dumber, because you are getting smarter. You are entering what researchers call the valley of despair. The long, humbling stretch where you realize how much you actually do not know, and most people quit here. They retreat back to the comfortable peak. They decide the subject is too complicated or not worth their time. They go back to the version of reality where they already had it figured out. But the people who push through the valley, the ones who sit in the discomfort of genuine not knowing, they eventually climb what is called the slope of enlightenment. And at the top of that slope is something genuinely rare, calibrated confidence. Not the fake certainty of Mount Stupid. Not the crushing self-doubt of the valley. But a real, earned sense of what you know, what you do not know, and how to tell the difference. That is mastery, and it looks completely different from the outside. Mastery is quiet in a way that fake confidence never is. True experts hedge their language not because they are weak but because they have encountered enough complexity to know that reality rarely fits into clean sentences. When a real scientist says the evidence suggests, or under these conditions, that is not weakness. That is intellectual honesty refined over years of being wrong and learning from it. When a real therapist says I am not sure what is happening for you yet, that is not incompetence. That is the appropriate humility of someone who has seen enough human complexity to know that premature diagnosis is more dangerous than temporary uncertainty. The people who sound the most certain are often the least qualified, and the people who sound the most uncertain are often the most worth listening to. Now let us talk about what you actually do with this. Because knowing about Dunning-Kruger does not automatically protect you from it. In fact, and this is important, there is research suggesting that learning about cognitive biases can sometimes make them worse. People become overconfident that they are now immune to the biases they have read about. You cannot simply think your way out of a cognitive trap by becoming aware it exists. You have to build actual habits, actual practices, that structurally counteract it. The first one is the hardest. Seek out the people who disagree with you and actually listen. Not to win, not to find the flaws in their argument so you can dismantle it. Listen to understand, because disagreement is information. The person who challenges your view is not your enemy. They are doing you the greatest intellectual favor available. They are showing you the edges of your map. Every time someone disagrees with you, there are 2 possibilities. Either they are wrong, or you are incomplete. And if you are living at the peak of Mount Stupid, you will always assume the first option, which means you will never update, which means you will never grow. The second habit is to replace the word no with the word think, more often than feels comfortable. Start noticing how often you make declarative statements. This is how people work. This is why the economy is broken. This is what she was really doing when she said that. And ask yourself how solid the foundation under that declaration actually is. Not to paralyze yourself with doubt, but to stay honest about the difference between genuine knowledge and confident opinion. The third habit is to spend time with people who are genuinely better than you at the things you think you are good at. This is uncomfortable in the specific way that growth always is. Being around people who are further along forces you off the peak because you can see, up close, what actual competence looks like. And it does not look like what you are doing. It looks different. It moves differently. It asks different questions. It catches things you did not even notice were there to catch. This proximity to real mastery is one of the most effective cures for the Dunning-Kruger trap, because it replaces your internal self-assessment, which is unreliable, with external evidence, which is much harder to dismiss. And the fourth habit, which might be the most powerful of all, is to get genuinely comfortable with saying, "I do not know," not as a performance of humility, not to seem modest, but because it is often the most accurate thing you can say, and accuracy should be the standard. The 3 words "I do not know" are not a confession of failure. They are a declaration of intellectual integrity. They are an opening through which real learning can enter. Every expert who ever became genuinely great passed through a long period of sitting in that discomfort and choosing honesty over the false comfort of manufactured certainty. Here is what the Dunning-Kruger trap is really about at its deepest level. It is not about intelligence. It is about ego. It is about the human need to feel competent, to feel like you have a handle on reality, to feel like you are not hopelessly lost in a world that is far more complex than any one person can fully grasp. And that need is not pathological. It is human. The problem is when we serve that need by faking certainty instead of building real understanding, when we protect our sense of competence by refusing to acknowledge our incompetence, when we choose the feeling of knowing over the uncomfortable but essential practice of actually trying to know. The people who escape this trap are not smarter than you in some fixed, permanent way. They have simply made a different decision about what they are willing to feel. They decided to be uncomfortable rather than wrong. They decided that being corrected was less painful than staying ignorant. They decided that the map mattered less than the territory, even when the territory was messy and hard, and refused to resolve into clean, certain sentences. And that decision, that single ongoing choice to stay curious instead of comfortable, is the difference between the person who peaks at Mount Stupid and the person who eventually sees the whole landscape clearly. You are going to be wrong today. About something. Maybe something small, maybe something significant. The question is not whether it will happen. The question is whether you will notice. Whether you have built enough internal honesty to feel the discomfort of being corrected and choose to stay with it instead of defending against it. The smartest people you will ever meet are not the ones who have the most answers. They are the ones who carry their questions the most carefully. They are the ones who know that certainty is often a ceiling, that the moment you decide you have figured something out, you have also decided to stop seeing it clearly. The Dunning-Kruger trap is not out there. It is not something that happens to other, less intelligent people while you watch from a comfortable distance. It is a feature of the human mind encountering the infinite complexity of reality with finite cognitive tools. It happens to everyone. The only variable is what you do when you catch yourself in it. And if this landed somewhere real, if some part of you recognized a version of yourself in what was described here, that discomfort you are feeling right now is not a problem. That is the valley. That is the beginning of actually knowing something. Stay in it. That is where the real growth lives.